trace our lineage for the Hendel family in New London way back to my great-grandparents, great-grandparents in Russia. My great-great-grandparents, Alexander and Sarah Hendel, lived in a small village which we call a shtetl, called Pustov. It's now in Belarus near the Lithuanian border. And they had one daughter and 5 sons. The daughter never had any children. The 5 sons really represent the 5 branches of the Hendel family. It was the middle son. His name was Pfeiffer Zelig, and he then became Philip Jacob when he came to the United States. And he was the first one to decide to leave, basically to escape the persecution, which was really rampant in Russia those days, and to seek economic opportunity in the United States. So Pfeiffer Zelig came to the United States in 1891, and he was met in New York by some relatives from his mother's side, the Engelsons. And they told him, first of all, they changed his first name from Pfeiffer Zelig to Philip Jacob. And they said his last name, Hendel, that was not a proper American name. It was really too Jewish. And they wanted him to have a proper American name, so from Hendel they changed it to Goldberg. And can you imagine that, from too Jewish name, Hendel, to a proper American name, Goldberg? So Philip Jacob Goldberg then went to, actually first from New York to Holyoke, Massachusetts, where there were relatives there, and then from there to Hartford, where he met his soon-to-be his wife, Rebecca, or as she was known to us, Becky Silverstein. And at some point, they decided to move to New London. Why exactly they moved to London, we're not quite sure. It may be that Becky had a relative in New London who might have been a tailor, and perhaps offered PJ, as he was known, Philip Jacob, an opportunity to set up in business. But in 1896, the first Hendel, although he was Goldberg, came to New London and set up shop in 1896. And in 1898, opened his first business, which was called The Output, at 27 Bank Street. It was a men's furnishing store, and it became very, very successful. Now, I do want to mention, when we're talking about Goldberg, their first baby was born in Hartford, Isidore, and Isidore eventually became a doctor. He started at Jefferson Medical School, and before he graduated, he decided Goldberg was not his first name, and he wanted to go back to Hendel. And on June 9th, 1916, with his father's concurrence, they went to court, and the entire family, the entire Goldberg family, got its name changed back to Hendel. So in 1916, they became Hendels again. The Output, as I mentioned, was a very successful store, and PJ eventually added women's furnishings to the store. And according to his grandson, who I spoke to recently, it became so prosperous that PJ, according to his grandson, was the wealthiest Jew in New London. He owned the first telephone in New London. According to his grandson, his wife wasn't so happy about it, because being the first telephone in New London, she said, there's nobody to talk to. It's the only telephone in New London. He also owned one of the first automobiles in New London. And after the Great War was over, he organized a parade, and his young daughter, who we called Babe, told us that she was the queen of the parade because she rode in the automobile at the head of the parade. That's reported in the New London Day. She told us this story at our 50th reunion that she came to. She was 99 years old at the 50th reunion, and related this story to us. PJ, I guess, invested a lot of his wealth in property as well. He owned a lot of property at Ocean Beach when it was still a private beach. He owned all the bathhouses on the boardwalk. He owned 3 boarding houses. He owned an ice cream parlor that was apparently very popular called Izzy's. It was all wiped out during the 1938 hurricane. He had died in 1934, but his wife Becky had all that property, and she didn't see a penny from it. It was all wiped out at that time. So that was PJ. His other two brothers, Richard and Julius, came to the United States in 1904. So he came in 1896 to Newland, and they came in 1904. He suggested they go to Westerly, where Becky, his wife's cousins, were. So they went first to Westerly, and then they eventually moved in 1906 up to Holyoke, again where her relatives were. In 1912, Julius ended up getting married to his wife Elizabeth. Richard had actually married in the old country, but his wife, Hendel, or Helen as she became known, didn't follow him until 2 years later, so she ended up moving back to the United States in 1906. They ended up coming back to New London in 1912, and Julius set up a shoe store, and in the back of the shoe store, Richard had a couple of sewing machines, and he started sewing things, and he developed what they called a waist. I'm not into style, but this waist apparently had garters that young boys could hold up their socks. I guess they didn't have elastic back then. They needed garters to hold up their socks. And it was called the Morris waist, and I guess it became quite popular, and he was fairly successful, and then they moved from that place to Howard Street, and continued producing. He went from 2 sewing machines to a little factory, and it was called the R&J Waist Company. Julius continued to sell shoes, and eventually he left that place and moved to the Lawrence Building on Bank Street, where he was selling shoes called the Eversource Shoe Company. Richard apparently became quite successful in this waist company thing and moved from Howard Street to Coit Street, and from a small factory became a large factory on Coit Street called the R&J Factory. Eventually, Julius gave up the shoe factory and moved in with Richard on Coit Street, and started manufacturing his own garments, an adjustable shorts, underwear. I guess sort of like nowadays you have these comfort waist garments. Back then it was a self-fit garment, and it was called the Hendel Manufacturing Company. So it was in the same building as the R&J factory. I guess he struggled a bit during the Depression and during World War II, but after World War II his 2 sons, Seymour and Stanley, joined him, and they started making sportswear, and the Hendel Manufacturing Company again kind of thrived, and they moved out of the R&J factory to their own operation on Washington Street. Again, became very successful, and then they moved to, they created their own building on Crystal Avenue, the Hendel Manufacturing Company, very, very successful. And in 1974, they sold out to Fuqua Industries, and Stanley and Seymour retired as very wealthy gentlemen after that. So those were the 3 brothers, or uncles as we called them, the 3 uncles that came to the United States, PJ, Richard, and Julius. The 3 uncles decided in the 1920s that they would try to bring their younger nephews over to the United States, because they understood how difficult it was for Jews in Europe at that time. And they got, with the help of their congressman, papers sent over to Europe, and tried to bring their 3 older nephews over to the United States. Hilbert, Morris, and William, as they would be known when they came to the United States, got those papers. Morris is my grandfather, and at the time they got those papers, he was in the Lithuanian army. And he was a pretty good soldier, although I understood that 10% of his thinking was on the Army, and 90% was on his girlfriend, who was in Europe at the time. Anyway, so they were about to go to the United States, but Morris was still in the Army. But his other brother, who wasn't about to leave, was pretty good at false papers, and managed to get a passport for him with his picture on it, but it wasn't really his passport. And they were also able to get civilian clothes smuggled to him on the troop transport that he was in. So my grandfather entered the train as a soldier, went into the men's bathroom. In the men's bathroom was his civilian clothes stashed in the bathroom, went in, changed into civilian clothes, left the bathroom as civilian, and met his two relatives, left the train as a civilian. They got on a boat in Hamburg and came to the United States in January 1922, and were met in New York by their uncles, Richard and Julius. When they got to the United States, they were put to work at the R&J factory, but they didn't last there very long. Morris was very interested in getting to meet his betrothed. His uncle and aunt were telling him, because he was new to the United States, back then they had collars. Old men had collars that were separate from their shirts. So his uncle Richard and Aunt Helen told him that he needed a new collar, in English, collar. In Yiddish, which is what my grandfather spoke, kala means betrothed. And he thought they meant he needed a new girlfriend. And this was a bit of misunderstanding for a while. They were telling him he needed a new collar in the United States. He said he had a collar already in Europe. They said, what good is a collar in Europe? You need a collar in the United States. Finally, they got this understood, and everything was okay. But soon his collar, his betrothed, actually came to the United States. She was in Springfield. He took off, left the job at R&J, went up to Springfield, got married to his betrothed, and started working for her brother in a diner up in Springfield. His cousin William started working at the R&J, lasted one day. The second day, he told in very broken English to his Italian supervisor, "I no work here no more," and left and started working with his cousin Hilbert, selling door-to-door dry goods. First, they started selling it from their little cousin Seymour's baby carriage. Seymour didn't need the baby carriage anymore, so they took the baby carriage and they were selling dry goods house to house. They went from a baby carriage eventually to a push cart, and then finally from a push cart they got a truck eventually. The truck, and then they got a store on Bank Street where they called the Hendel Furniture Company. They eventually started selling furniture, and then in addition to furniture, they started selling stoves. From stoves, they decided to sell gas and oil for the stoves, and as they say, from there it was history. And they became they became one of the largest businesses in southeastern Connecticut, selling oil, propane gas, furniture, and the rest is history in terms of that. The other brother, two brothers, Bernie, came over, and he and his wife set up a dress store down in Bank Street. I think it was 455 Bank Street, dress store and a small manufacturing store. That was also wiped out in the 1938 hurricane. They tried to get it started again on Ocean Avenue. They didn't realize that Ocean Avenue was not zoned for commercial business, and that ended up being kind of shut down. They reopened in Mystic. The fifth brother, Irving, the one who did this false papers, he ended up finally coming over as well, and ended up working for Metropolitan Life. My grandfather, the one who ended up going to Springfield to marry his Kala, came back to the United States, came back to, New London, I think in 1925, 26 or so, and bought a restaurant down in Bank Street called the Fireman's Lunch. That became quite successful. He was, as far as I understood, I've been told, the first restaurant in New London to get a liquor license, and that was a very successful business, hard business, I understood, but a very successful business down on Bank Street for many years. He ended up closing that, had a furniture store for a while, and then opened a toy store called Lee's Kittyland, which many people remember very fondly. And then his son Chick and his son-in-law Sherman Marcus took that over, and his grandson, my cousin Peter Marcus, still runs Lee's Kittyland, derivative of that in Groton right now. The family created a family organization in 1949. June 26, 1949 was our first Hendel Family Association meeting in Grand Lake Lodge in Lebanon, Connecticut. And we've had our meetings ever since, every year. We've had a 50th grand reunion. Just recently we've had our 75th reunion, which was very successful. Many of our family members came from basically all over the world, from Spain and France, as well all over the country to come back for that. It was a great reunion. Here in New London, there's only a handful of us still living in New London. I think maybe 25 or so of us. There are, I think, 472 living Hendels now, but they're pretty much dispersed all over the country, all over the world as well. Here in New London, the Hendels, I think, have a reputation of being very community-minded. A number of Hendels have served in a variety of public service. I myself have served on the Board of Education here. I served as president. I've served on the New London City Council as deputy mayor. Another cousin, Philip, served as deputy mayor as well. Cousin Pat Hendel served as state representative. Cousin Myron has served as New London Redevelopment Agency, as chair of the Water and Sewer Commission. Seymour L. Hendel was Superior Court judge for many years. Seymour S., we had two Seymours. Seymour L., he was very tall. He was called Seymour Long. Seymour S. was short. Seymour was on the Redevelopment Agency as well. Rita Hendel was on the State Board of Education. So many Hendels serving in many public service roles. Community service, volunteer service. My wife is on the London Beautification Committee and spends many hours keeping the city beautiful. Many of the Hendels on religious organizations, Bethel Synagogue and other religious organizations, the Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut, serving in those capacities as well. I mentioned Stanley Hendel after he retired from the Hendel Manufacturing, did a lot of work with the cancer organization, retired executives, giving transportation for people with cancer to the cancer hospitals and so on. I'm probably forgetting many other relatives who served in many ways, volunteering and so on. I called him Uncle Doc. He wasn't really my uncle, cousin, but so many of the members of the family referred to him as Uncle Doc. He was certainly my inspiration for going into medicine myself. There's so many stories of Doc Hendel and what he did. There's one story that's reported of him going into a home. It was around Christmas time, and after treating the patient, leaving and realizing that the family had really no money for Christmas presents, and he put a $5 bill in the hand of one of the children there and left, and didn't leave it at that. He came back about half an hour later with his arms filled with sweaters and shirts and other clothes for the family. And the mother remembered this and reported it at a testimonial dinner given for Doc Hendel in the mid-50s at Ocean Beach Park, and there was something like 650 people at this testimonial dinner, just talking about all the things that he did. He was such a generous man, giving to so many people. One story about myself, it was just before I started medical school, about a week or two before I started medical school, and I had these terrible abdominal pains. I was sure I had appendicitis. I went to see Doc and told him about my abdominal pains, and he was sitting in his office, and he told me about his own beginning of medical school. And he said he was so nervous, and he went into the anatomy lab before anatomy started. There was no one else there, and he went up to one of the cadavers and he touched it, and he said he felt like an electric shock went through his whole body. And he said, but he made it through medical school, and he was sure I would do the same. He said, I've known you all my life, I delivered you. He said, the family's so proud of you for going into medical school, and I'm sure you're going to be fine. I said, okay. I said, but are you going to examine me? He said, no, I think you'll be fine. And I left his office. I never had another twinge of pain. He was that good a diagnostician. Not that I would recommend my students not examining patients, but that's how good he understood his patients. Remarkable man. And again, he was really my inspiration for going into medicine.
That's
another great story about Doc. It's one of my cousins, cousin Ted, when he was a young boy. This was in the 1930s, I think, before antibiotics, had developed pneumonia. And there's a Jewish superstition about trying to fool the angel of death. And Ted was seriously ill. They weren't sure he was going to live. And to fool the angel of death, they moved him out of his house and moved him in with one of his uncles. And they actually gave him a new name. So they instead of calling him by his original name, they gave him a new Hebrew name called Chaim. And Ted talked about how Doc stood by his side, and he was in an oxygen tent, and Doc was by his side hours and hours and hours, and he did finally recover. So they said they had fooled the angel of death. But Ted was, forever grateful to Doc Hendel for sitting by his side for all those years. So.